All right. All right. We're here.
All right.
So I'm going to introduce you first. So, Tansi Cat, this is Ciarra Greene, Nibipu, from Lapway. Ciarra's a recent graduate of the science teaching master's degree here at PSU. She's been involved in a lot of different projects. She was involved with Quamish Prairie here in town. She did her undergrad at Northern Arizona University, where she worked with uranium testing in the Navajo Nation. Now she's currently talking to us from Glacier National Park.
I'm in Idaho.
No? Oh, she's in Idaho. She's here in town to present to our class, and we all know what happened. The elements took charge, so she's been gracious enough to join us from Lapway.
Yep, I'm in town right now.
I don't know why it's rotating like that.
It's nice.
But we will, and we're joined by other folks. We'll go around and introduce ourselves. And then real quick, where we're from, what our major is.
Awesome.
Go ahead. Kick it off, Jesse.
All right. Hello, I'm Jesse Norton. I studying Indigenous Nation Studies here at Portland State. Do photography as well. I'm a sophomore / junior right now, somewhere in between. I'm also a member of USHE, the United Indigenous Students in Higher Education, and an advocate for healing feathers.
Hello, I'm Matt. I'm majoring in marketing, minoring in INST. I'm the coordinator for USHE, co-president for ACES here at Portland State, and advocate for healing feathers.
I'm Ginger. I'm Lincoln Haida. I'm science major, Indigenous Nation Studies minor, part of Healing Feathers, part of USHE. I work for Indigenous Nation Studies department. Just regular student.
Hello, my name is Callie Phillips. I'm from Cherokee, North Carolina. I'm a member of the Eastern Band of Cherokee Indians. I'm majoring in political science with a minor in Indigenous Nation Studies here.
I'm Marta. I am a level studies major, and moving toward a counseling degree.
Hi, my name is Nathan. My major is geography. And I'm also an Indigenous Nation Studies.
I'm Rowan. I am doing science
Lots of cat. My name is Gabe Shoeship, so you can't see me. I've had the joy of leading this wonderful class and learning amongst them and from them. We've had a good term, learning through applied practice, learning through observation, and a few choice guest speakers. Ciarra is our last guest speaker. We're happy and honored to have you both, everybody on the line.
Cool. Thanks for all the intros. It's good to see you guys. I really was bummed about missing the other week. I'm thinking, I just came from Glacier where we had like 6 inches of snow every day, and nobody was more than 10 minutes late to work. So the little bit that was amusing for Portland to cancel everything. But I'm glad everyone's safe and we're here today. So before we get started, I just want to thank Leah. She works with OSTA, and she really helped us set this up on the webinar because I'll tell you about my background, but it isn't in technology or doing anything like webinars. So she was really instrumental in getting this going. And Leah, do you want to introduce yourself and maybe give some background on OSTA?
Yeah, OSTA stands for the Oregon Science Teachers Association. So right now I'm working with them on their newsletter and their website and kind of all the communications work. But my background is in elementary school education and kind of specializing in science education for elementary age students. And I taught kindergarten for 6 years. And I also recently completed the Master's of Science Teaching at Portland State. So yeah, I'm excited we could make this happen. It's really fun to have people joining us from all over.
Yeah, and I see various people here on the line. I'm not sure if you guys in the classroom can see that, so that's cool. Everybody online, welcome. And Leah, maybe if you can put that link in, everybody online can do an introduction, and then the people who are there in class and everybody, you're probably going to want a piece of paper or two throughout this.
Right now.
But in the classroom, if you guys just want to write how this class that you're in right now will benefit your career goals, and just kind of take a minute to reflect on that while everybody online puts in their information. Sorry, I know you guys all moved to sit in the camera scope. Hi, young going on there. I see you. All right, so again, the ones in class, how is this course that you're in going to benefit your career goals? Now that you guys are winding down in your course. All right, and I'm just going to take 1 second to see how everybody's input online. Awesome. Okay. All right, so yeah, if you're online and you also want to just type in a little answer about how this webinar is going to benefit your career or your interests, or what you're doing on here. I know it got shared pretty broadly, which was exciting, and I'm excited to share my story with you guys. But I just want to know who's all here and what everybody's interests are, so that'll be helpful. Okay, so I'm going to jump on here. It looks like we have some educators, some friends, some Elena from up in Alaska, that's great. Hannah from Idaho, Leah's in from Portland, and Rachel from Lewiston. So that looks great. And I see some others on here who maybe weren't able to fill that out. So that's okay. I still can, some of you I know, and I know where you're coming from. So that's great. So I'm going to try here and share my screen and we can get going. Okay. All right, so everybody can see this here. All right, everybody can see that?
Yeah.
Awesome. Okay, so thanks for the intro, Gabe, and everybody for attending. This might be a little bit different of a lecture than what you've experienced, and for any educators who are on, this is pretty much kind of my approach to teaching. And then for those in the science fields, this kind of just gives you a pretty different perspective of what science is. So, Inamwani Ciarra Greene, ka inwas nimipu ka soyapo. And so that's my traditional introduction of myself. My name's Ciarra Greene. I'm Nez Perce and also a non-tribal. So I'll kind of get into that on the next slide. Up there at the top says Nimipu Ayat, that means Nez Perce woman. So here's kind of on my non-tribal side of my family. Up in the left, you can see my mom's mom, Betty Lou, and she passed away when my mom was a kid, so I never really got to meet her. But below that is her brother, Bill, and he really instilled in me a lot of character, I would say. He lives up in Alaska also, so I spent some time with him, and he really was instrumental, I think, in building my confidence in my knowledge that I had about the environment and then just asking questions. The two ladies in the top right, well, one of them is my sister, but in the middle is my grandma. And on the left of that is also my other grandma. And they helped me make my wing dress, which I'm wearing in the picture below. So they're like lifetime gardeners and really do have a connection with the land, although they're not tribal. So I think that's important to point out and discuss, that I'm both tribal and non-tribal, and really carrying those roots from both sides is important. And in that picture on the bottom is my sister, starting on the right, my sister, my stepdad, my niece, my mom, and my other niece. And this was at their name-giving ceremony in December. So I have great family support on my non-tribal side, as much as I do my tribal side. And so here's just kind of talking about where I come from. My great-great-great-grandfather, Pile of Clouds, he was a medicine man for the Nez Perce people back during the Nez Perce Wars. And he was selected by Chief Joseph to be one of the war chiefs, and was instrumental and really, really a visionary when it came to the war and what was going to happen with the decisions that were being made. In the center there is my great-grandmother so Pile of Clouds is on my grandma's side. In the middle there you see my great-great-grandmother, Lizzie Cayuse, and she's on my grandpa's side. And she was a prominent spokeswoman for the Nez Perce, and she actually traveled quite a bit with Joseph in those days, Chief Joseph in those days. So this is a picture of her over by Nesbulem in Washington. And I just love these pictures because I can see my family and myself in them, and I think that's really powerful. And their longstanding connection to land and what they were fighting for during the Nez Perce Wars and our treaty rights, and just really to keep and maintain our culture and our lifestyle. On the far right, you see my Uncle Larry, and he's the eldest male in our family that's living. And he's served on our Nez Perce Executive Committee for several years. He attended the inauguration of Obama. And he's just really been a kind of a foundational piece in our family, being the eldest male and carrying on a lot of our traditions. But we are Nimipu, and we are the people. And Nimipu is just one of our names. Other tribes called us Sipnipdelu, which means the people who walked out of the mountains. And the modern term for what we are is the Nez Perce, which is actually not at all pierced nose. That's really actually a confusing term to call us. We never did have pierced noses. It's actually, I guess, can you guys see me still on the side?
We've got trouble seeing the whole frame of the picture that the slideshow. The boxes are up in the mix.
Oh, I think you guys have control over that. Am I right, Leah? Yeah, if you minimize that.
Hide video panel.
Oh.
Got it?
Now we can't see you.
Oh, but now you can't see me. But it's okay. You don't have to see me, I guess.
There we go. There we go.
We can see you.
Okay. Everybody got that? So nez perce actually, translates from the French nez percé, which means pierced nose, but that wasn't at all what we had or what we were. We didn't have pierced noses. Actually, with this term signiptalu, which means people who walked out of the mountains, back when they used a lot of sign language to communicate, they would use their nose to represent the mountains, and they would use this motion like going across their face up towards down in a diagonal fashion through their nose, showing like people who walked out of the mountains. And so in translation, it got lost as, oh, they're piercing their nose, when that's not at all what it was. So that's who I am. That's what. And if you're calling in, maybe if you can put yourself on mute, because I can hear somebody chatting. Thanks. So that's who I am. I'm Nimipu. I'm the people. Here's our that dark kind of cream color is our traditional homelands. The light green color was our first treaty, our 1855 treaty, and the dark green is our 1863 treaty. So you can see how our landmass and homelands have diminished over time. In our treaties, we did sign for usual and custom areas. So throughout that that dark tan region, we still are able to practice our culture and traditions, hunting, fishing, and gathering. But, our reservation now is just that polygon shape in the dark green in the middle. So now if everybody can take a minute and think about what your connection to nature is. In the classroom, they have Post-it notes. And I believe, Leah, I sent a link to you for those who are online to fill out and submit. To fill out through a Google form. And it's really just like a statement. I don't want your whole story, unfortunately, not yet. That'll be towards the end. But if you can just answer the statement in a phrase in 10 or words less. So it should take you maybe a minute or less to come up with what is your connection to the land, to nature.
On our Post-it notes?
Yeah, on your Post-it notes. So everybody in the classroom will have one Post-it note for this question. Oh yeah, it's a link. The link is fragmented on there. Okay, and I'm just gonna see how that's coming in. All right, so everybody have a chance to do that. I see in the classroom, it looks like everybody's done. Let me go back to sharing my screen. This is a little tricky, but we'll get through it. All right, so we're just gonna set those aside for now. I just wanted everybody to take like a brief moment to really reflect on like what is your personal connection to nature. Throughout this presentation, I'm going to talk about my connection to nature and just where that has taken me in my life. So in all good Native traditions, everything starts with a story. And so I'll tell you our creation story because that's where I come from. Ciarra, he's our coyote. And as usual, coyotes, playing around in the mountains and all the other animals are going about their days. And Fox, he comes running up to Coyote on the hillside and he says, Coyote, Coyote, Ciarra, there's a monster that's eating all the animals and all the people. Well, there wasn't people at this time, so eating all the animals and plants. But a lot of times I'll refer to them as people because they had human-like characteristics at that time. So Fox runs up the hill and says, Coyote, there's a monster down eating all the people, all the animals and plants. And Coyote says, oh, whatever, Fox. He's, per Coyote, if you know him, he's kind of just what we would say lamutits. He's like always up to no good. He's kind of off on his own, never paying attention. And so Fox goes, come on, I'll show you. So they start running down the hill, and Fox is leading the way so he can show Coyote where to go. And as they approach the bottom of the hill, there's this big wind that comes and sucks in the fox. And Fox disappears into this monster's belly. And Coyote like slams on his brakes if he had them at the time, and he screeches to a stop, and he's looking around. He's like, oh, wow, there are no birds in the air. There are no fish in the water. There are no animals on the hillsides or on the prairies. And he realizes like, wow, this monster really did eat everybody. I'm the only one left out here. And so in the belly of the monster is all of these other animals. And Coyote really sits and thinks to himself, what am I going to do to get them out? And he's starting to look around and think of all of the things that he can do. And so he starts thinking about, he's looking in the water, and he sees, he thinks about beaver, and he says, oh, beaver. Well, beaver is the one who brought fire to the Nez Perce people. So this is kind of like a foreshadowing to the future. But he looks into the water, and he thinks about beaver. He's like, oh, beaver had fire. If I can get fire, maybe I can burn the monster. So he goes and he gathers all the materials he needs for fire. And then he's thinking, okay, well, wait, let's really think about this. Let's think about this. The next thing he thinks about is, he thinks about the birds. And he's like, oh yeah, they build really good nests. They kind of weave things together. He thinks, oh, I'll make a rope. If I make a nice strong rope, that can help hold me away from the monster. So he gathers all the materials for rope. And then he's thinking, what else? And he's looking on the hillsides, and he thinks a grizzly bear with this big sharp claws. And he's like, oh, they have claws, but my paws are not that sharp, but I can make some knives. So he goes and gets all the materials, and he makes some knives. And as he's sitting there, he feels confident. He's like, okay, I've got something from the water. I've got something from the air. I've got something from the land. And these are all things that, were inspired him to make these tools. And he says, okay, I think I'm ready to approach this monster so I can save everyone. And so he's sitting on a rock, and he's thinking, okay, so he ties himself real tight to the Seven Devils Mountains, actually. He ties himself to, so with that rope that he made. And he tucks his pocket, his knives into his fur, and he tucks his flint into his fur and some wood that he had gathered. He's like, okay, I'm ready. So then he sneaks up onto this rock, and he starts yelling at the monster. Hey, monster, what are you doing eating all my friends? You're no good. Really just kind of badgering him. Well, the monster, he looks over and he says, who do you think you are? You can't escape me. And the monster takes in a big gust of air, and Coyote's rope barely even moves. He just kind of, his fur kind of just rustles in the wind. He's like, is that all you got? And the monster gets more infuriated and takes a bigger and deeper breath. And this time, Coyote floats up in the air, and his rope is pulled taut. And he thinks, oh, that was close. And he lands back down when the monster had ran out of breath. And then he continues to badger the monster, and the monster's thinking, okay, that's it, Coyote. I'm sick of dealing with you. And he takes one more bigger and deeper breath, and Coyote goes flailing in the air, and his rope is pulled really tight. And as he's in the air, pulled tight, he thinks, if this just keeps going on, how am I going to save my friends? And so he pulls one knife from his fur, and he cuts the rope and gets sucked into the monster. Well, now he's in the monster's belly also. And he arrives, and everybody's like, oh, great, Coyote's here. He's up to no good. He's never a good sign. He's always going to ruin everything. And so Coyote's like, hey, guys, I made it. I'm here to save you. And everybody's like, yeah, right. Coyote's not going to save us. Coyote's going to be the last one to save us. He's never does anything right. So he has all these naysayers the second he gets in there. But Fox, as loyal as the friend he is, nobody knows why, but he's loyal to Coyote. And he's like, hey, Coyote, you're in here. Do you have a plan? And Coyote's like, yeah, I got a plan. I got these knives. I got this flint to make a fire. And so a couple of the animals gather around, and they're like, oh, so what do you have, Coyote? But Some of them not so much, and they kind of just taunt Coyote as he's walking through the stomach of the monster. And even like Snake is hissing at him and kind of taunting him and teasing him, and Coyote smacks him on the head and flattens his head. And so Rattlesnake still has a flat head today. And so there's several occasions within the belly of the monster that Coyote does this to different animals. I'm giving you the short version, believe it or not. And so Coyote, he says, okay, first I got this fire. So he decides, I'm gonna build a fire. So he gets his flint and he starts to make a fire. And as the smoke starts to billow, the monster starts to cough, and he coughs, and he coughs. And every once in a while, the openings of his body are open just enough for maybe a mouse to scurry out, or maybe a sparrow to fly out. And then he runs out of wood and the fire goes out. You know, everybody was kind of getting excited, like, hey, we are going to get out of here. And then the fire went dead, and everyone's like, oh man, Coyote, you never do anything right. You're no good. You just waste everyone's time. And well, those who got out, they didn't come back. They were like, we're out of here. Coyote always messes everything up anyways. We're free. So they left. So then Coyote's, you know, more people go to the sides and are like, yeah, talking about Coyote. He's no good. He never does anything right. But Fox and a few others stayed there and they're like, well, now what, Coyote? Now what are we going to do? Coyote says, well, I got these knives. Maybe we can cut our way out. So Coyote goes over and he starts cutting away and cutting away. And everyone's starting to get excited. They're like, hey, yeah, we can cut our way out of here. Well, then his knife breaks. And everyone's like, oh, great. Coyote never does anything right. You know, on and on. They carry on. More leave Coyote's side. But Fox and a couple others, but more, you know, less this time, stick around and say, now what, Coyote? He says, well, I got another knife. And so he's like, so he starts to cut away again and cut and he cut. Well, that knife breaks. And again, same thing. Coyote never does anything right, and more leave the group. Coyote stands there with Fox, and he's like, I have one knife left. This is it. After this, I have no plan. And he's looking around, and he sees the heart just beating and beating. And he says, I'm going to cut the heart of the monster. And so Coyote starts to cut away at the monster. And Fox at this time, he's starting to rally people. He's like, hey, you guys, this is it. This is the last chance to get out of here. This is his last knife. After this, there's no other option. What are we going to do? We got to cheer on Coyote. So as Coyote's cutting away and it's starting to tear at the heart more and more, everybody starts to cheer, Coyote, it's yeah. And they're really cheering him on, and everybody's on his team now. And sure enough, he cuts the heart of the monster. And when you kill something, all the openings of the animal open up. And so what we would call the teetsin, or the backside, that opens up. And the ears and the eyes and the mouth and the nose, everything opens up. All the animals are able to escape out the holes, except Muskrat. Muskrat, he was a little late to running out the teetsin, the backside, and his tail got caught and stripped all his fur. So he doesn't have fur anymore on his tail, but he did make it out. So everybody gets out, and they fly back up into the air, and the fish jump back into the waters, and all the animals go back to the mountains and the prairies. And there's Coyote by one of my great, I think, kindergartners at the time. And finally, you know, he kills the monster. All the animals are out onto their home, wherever they came from. And all that's left is a dead monster, Coyote, and Fox. And Fox goes, well, now what? Now what are you going to do, Ciarra? And Coyote says, well, we can't waste anything. We never waste anything. So he starts cutting away at the monster. One arm he throws out to the mountains, and he says, over there will be these people. Over there is going to be the flathead. Over there, he throws another piece. Up there is going to be the Coeur d'Alene. Over there is going to be the Swinomish. And he throws all of the parts of the monster out and makes all these tribes everywhere across the Northwest. And Coyote feels pretty good about himself, like he would, you know, sit there real puffed up. Yeah, I knew I could do it, and really proud of himself, just proud. And Fox goes, Coyote, what about here? What are you going to put here? Are you going to put people here? And Coyote goes, well, yeah, of course I thought of that. You know, he's never going to be wrong. And so he says, yeah, I got this. And so he takes what's left of the heart, and he takes drops of the blood, and he washes his hands with it, and he sprinkles it on the land. And that's all that was left, really, was the heart that was there, but he couldn't make a piece out of it because it was had been spoiled when he was cutting it. But all that was left, so he took that blood and he sprinkled it on the land where the monster's heart was. And he said, but right here, all I have left is a little bit. So these people are going to be small in number, but they're going to be mighty and powerful. And so he made right there the Nimipu people. And the heart of the monster still lays along the Clearwater River up in Kamiai, Idaho. And so that's my connection to the land. That's where I come from. I come from the land. I come from the heart of the monster. And that's our creation story as Nimipu. But, various tribes have their own story. And anybody who's listening, I'd encourage you to find out either where you were born and raised and who the Indigenous people were there and what their story is, or wherever you are now. There's creation stories all across this world, and this is ours. This is where I come from. And so that's why I'm so connected to the land since time immemorial. And this is a quote I always heard growing up. I belong to the land out of which I came. The earth is my mother. And that always really stuck with me. And, as a kid, you don't always understand what something means. And I'm still learning. I look at this quote probably, at least once a month. And sometimes it means something different. And I'm continually learning from this quote. And this really drives the work that I do and explains my connection to the land. I belong to the land out of which I came. The earth is my mother. So in thinking, if I had to write a Post-it note or write what my connection to the land is, I would have wrote, this land is my body. And this is where I come from. And so this picture here just shows the seasonal round. Really, throughout the year, our different connections to the land as Nez Perce people. Over here, I don't know if you guys can see my mouse or not, but at the top of the circle it says January, February, and it has our names for the months, or not really the months, but the time of the year. So I can't see because you guys are in the way. But if you look over here at March, Latidal, which means Letit means arrowleaf balsam root. So pretty soon here on the hillsides, we should see arrowleaf balsam root coming up. And towards the end, I'll show you what I went and checked out today on our seasonal round. Because as you can imagine, we're watching for seasonal round, but we're watching for arrowleaf balsam root, Letit, but we're also watching for couch. And so we are always looking ahead to see what's coming up next. And you have to check on it and see. You don't just show up and expect things to be ready. It's like it's more like a banquet. We're all in this together. Everybody's got to bring their share to the table. And we as humans are part of that also. We can't just show up with nothing. We have to come with our knowledge. And that's really our contribution to this this banquet, this potluck that we have. So since this class is cultural ecology, I assume you guys have learned what ecology is. Whoops. But I just pulled this up real quick for those who are just calling in and haven't been in the class the whole time. Ecology, it comes from a German zoologist, but actually it's a Greek word meaning household, home, or place to live. And so really, ecology deals with organisms and their environments, the interactions between individuals, between populations, and between organisms and their environment. And that's what forms ecosystems. And so I'm going to be talking about traditional ecological knowledge. And so when I teach this with kids, a lot of times they say, what does traditional mean? What does ecological mean? What does knowledge mean? And we really break it down that way. For you guys, I just put this definition up here, but I think it's important to point out where this definition came from. The Dene Cultural Institute, which is up in Canada, and this definition is developed by Indigenous people. And I think that's really important to just be aware of when you're working with Indigenous populations or in education, in science, whatever your background is, really. If you're going to be talking about a group of people and their knowledge, maybe they should be the ones explaining that. And so this definition comes from the Dene people up in Canada. And so I'm not going to read it. I'm actually going to take a drink of water while everybody else reads that. Okay, and so, oops. If everybody wants to get out a piece of paper, this next part is really going to be part of the note-taking process, but really more of you identifying what I'm talking about, because I'll kind of get into this, but just trust me on this, and I'll explain it when we get there. But if you want to make kind of this diagram here on your page, TEK on one side, traditional ecological knowledge, and then write each of these words down or phrases, and you might, and you might want to leave like 3 lines in between, or however you want to do it. But throughout my discussion, I guess throughout my talk, I'm hoping you'll write examples of when there's oral tradition, when you think that firsthand observation is being demonstrated. Whenever any of these are being demonstrated, go ahead and write it down. It's like oral tradition, me telling our creation story. That's oral tradition. Although it is written down, it's always, I like it when people tell it, because everybody tells it different. And I mean, there's all kinds of versions of it. That's my own version. Like, no, I don't think anybody else says Coyote slammed on his brakes. I think that's my own take on it, but that's just what I see and hear when I'm envisioning the story being told. So I'll give everybody a minute to write those down. Even the folks at home or who have called in, that would be, it's not for my benefit, it's for yours. So I'll just say that. So for those who are phoning in, I'm giving the folks who have called in a chance to write these down. And I guess I can read them off. Oral tradition, firsthand observation, system of classification, empirical observations, local environment, self-management of resource use, social aspect, spiritual aspect, varies among community members, roots in the past, cumulative, dynamic, generational, adaptive to new technology, and adaptive to socioeconomic changes. And I'm keeping an eye on the class, and they'll kind of let me know when they're done writing, and I'll assume others are done too. Oh, and what time do you guys usually take your break? About
7.
7. All right, thanks. I think that's somebody who's calling in, but I can hear your music. Thank you. You don't want me to karaoke, I promise. All right, looks like everybody in the classroom is done. Oh yeah, let's see. I forgot you guys can see those too. Okay, so moving on. So tradition ecological knowledge. I'm just going to tell you a little bit about how I was raised. I told you my connection to the land was based on our Ninipu creation story. But growing up, you know, I was raised, the men in my family really carried the traditions. And so we hunted a lot growing up, always having game meat, deer, elk, moose. I remember once when I was really young, we got a bear and it was hanging like outside and we had to walk under it. And I always thought that was like really cool. But on the left hand, you can see there my uncle with a moose that he got a couple years ago. And over here, my little brother claiming this deer that he got. And he's always excited about being part of that process. So again, just think about if any of these you see throughout this explanation. When I was younger, I never wanted to shoot the gun, but I always wanted to help be there to take care of the animal. And so it wasn't until I was in my 20s that I finally shot my first deer. And I'll say it was like a little tiny, tiny deer. So I'm due. I wanted to get an elk this year, but I've been really, really busy and on the road, so I haven't been home enough to do that. I could have, you know, come home and shot an elk and gone about it, but I really wanted to make sure I could take care of it from the beginning to end. And the times that I've been home, I've not been able to commit that kind of time. So we've hunted growing up and also fishing. This is a picture of my family fishing at our annual spot in central Idaho. It's called the Ciarra River. And there's my nephew holding up a salmon that somebody else most likely caught. I think that would kind of pull him downstream. But and for those who don't know gaff fishing, you can see on that picture they have those long poles that's made of lodgepole pine. And then we have these big hooks that we fasten onto the end. And it takes a whole family. It's a whole family affair. You put that hook into the water, and you can see up there on the banks, kind of the teenage gals in our family, and most of the fishers are guys. Some of us girls hop in there once in a while and try and show them up. Again, keep thinking about these different aspects that maybe you see within my experience that I'm sharing. So here's another picture of us fishing. You put that hook into the water, and usually upstream and downstream, the kids are throwing rocks into the holes where the fish will hide. And we have some people with the goggles, like my dad and my brother usually wear the goggles, and they will swim under the water and see if there's any fish in the holes before we like stick our poles in there or anything. Because sometimes I've seen it more times than you'd believe. They go under the water and they come up and they're holding a salmon, and they caught the salmon by their hands because it was under there resting as these salmon are returning from their run to the ocean. And so the kids are upstream and downstream throwing rocks. My aunties and my grandma, and usually the ladies are on the banks, kind of the spotters. And it's really hard to see when you're in the water what's running through the water. And so those who are have the gaff poles in the water, they actually feel when the salmon hits their pole, and that's when you pull it really, really fast. And that's how you catch them. I have a story where I caught my first one and I broke my foot all in the same bit. And that's I can tell stories for days, but that's another story for another day. And over here, wait, I forgot you guys can see it. Over here, a long time ago, like back in the day of our ancestors, the first fish you would eat the heart out of. And so here, this was our first salmon that we caught that year. And so I have the heart in my hand, and I ate it. And it was quite the feat, the kids thought. And it really felt, it was like a really spiritual experience, and really like connected me back to that place and that water and that life that salmon gave to us. So that was really a powerful experience, and I try to see if anybody else in our family wants to continue that on, but I haven't found anybody yet. Let's see. Oh, there we go. All right, so my family is really big. You can see that big picture of us on the bottom, and we've definitely added some more since then. That's at our annual fishing trip. And up here you can see my mom and my stepdad, me, my sister, and her husband. And my family has always been just my number one supporters. No matter what we do, we always have unconditional love. And I think that's like one of our family values. No matter what, we always stick together, and we always continue to do our traditions and practice our culture together. And so some of you might be thinking, like, why is she just talking about herself? And it's not intended to be that way at all. But I have found that sharing my personal story, I'm sharing knowledge. And then I'm identifying knowledge that I didn't even know I had. You know, a lot of this is just how I was raised. This is just how we are. But now I'm learning how to translate that knowledge into my professional field and into academics and with community members outside of my family. And it's really giving me a voice, my family a voice, my tribe and community a voice in addressing broader issues outside. So I encourage you all to think about your personal narrative, no matter what you're working in. I know somebody said they're getting a degree in counseling. Like, I'm sure your personal narrative is really important in that field. And I think just taking time to reflect on yourself and your own knowledge and your own story is a great way to connect with people. And so that's why I'm sharing my story. And hopefully you guys are picking up pieces of knowledge, and putting this presentation together, I was able to identify more knowledge that I had that I didn't really know that I had, if that makes any sense. So that's how I was raised. That's where I was, born and raised, up here in Idaho. And I always say the middle of nowhere, Idaho, because really we're like in the middle, next to Washington, at the confluence of the Snake and Clearwater rivers. But when I was 18 and graduated high school, I said, I am out of here and I'm never coming back. And away I went to Flagstaff, Arizona. And this picture over here, the black and white one, I went to in an engineering camp before I graduated high school, actually, down at Northern Arizona University. And I just loved the place. There was other natives there in the camp with me. There, I met native scientists. I met, I just saw this beautiful scenery, and I thought I could see myself living here even without my family. And as you saw how big my family was, like, that's really important for me, my family, but I also knew my academic endeavors were something that was going to be my own journey. And so I took that leap of faith, really, and went to Arizona. And Arizona is a whole different world than Idaho, if you can believe that. In this middle picture, I learned what monsoon season was, hiking up the San Francisco peaks in July. Up in the left-hand top corner is hail outside my window, my door. At the bottom, there's new creatures to observe and get to know, lizards and scorpions and tarantulas and all these things that I, especially tarantulas, was not fond of, and still am not, but that's something I learned in moving to Arizona. And different plants. I've always had a strong connection to plants, and it's continued to build over the year, but in Arizona there was literally a whole new world. And of course the beautiful red rocks that are scattered about the landscape. And something I realized when I first got down there was, yeah, I'm in a whole different world. There's different people here. There's different tribal people here. And the first time I went into a gas station by myself, and I realized everybody was speaking Navajo or Diné. And I thought that was just amazing because our language isn't that strong. Although there's great efforts, not as many people speak Nimipu Timt as they do Diné. So here's a map, and I think for the educators on the line and those in the classroom, it's really important when thinking about studying ecology. If you're wanting to know about the place that you're in, start with Indigenous people, and also start with calling the people by what they call themselves. The Navajo is not what they call themselves. They call themselves the Diné. And the Nez Perce, we don't call ourselves that. We call ourselves the Nimipu. So it's just something to really start breaking down those barriers and the idea of colonization. And again, that's a whole nother talk for a whole nother day, but it's just something I really wanted to point out. And my friend Aaron, he's the one who makes these maps. And I honestly emailed him this afternoon and said, hey, Aaron, I would really like to use this map. Can you send me one? And he did. And this is what he was able to send. And he has this not only for the US, but I believe the First Nations also. So he's a great resource. And I think you can find the tribal nations traditional names online. Tribal Nations Maps is the business that he's created. And so, yeah, being in this whole new world, and I was getting my degree in chemistry, and it was my freshman year. And mind you, when you start school, and those who are in the classroom right now can attest, like you go to college and you realize you don't know anything. You know how to tie your shoes, and you know how to brush your teeth, and otherwise you're pretty fresh in the world. And I met a professor, her name was Dr. Janie Ingram, and she really took me under her wing, and she was a Navajo professor in chemistry. She was a Diné professor in chemistry studying uranium. I had never heard about uranium before, although we have the Hanford Nuclear Waste Site up here in the Northwest, which does impact our tribe. And so I started learning about her project, and she said, oh yeah, you can start right away. And I said, yeah, sure, sounds great. Well, little did I know as a bright-eyed, bushy-tailed freshman is I didn't even know chemistry at the time, let alone uranium and biosurfactants and bioremediation and metal oxides and chelation and all these words. So she gave me the project proposal and I read it and I thought, okay, I need like a dictionary and like an environmental chemistry set, and I need to figure out what this is even talking about. And as I started to learn about the massive problem of abandoned uranium mines on down in the Four Corners, really, I started to learn about the health implications of uranium contamination. And then also even a map like this, where it shows abandoned mines, where this in itself is incomplete. These are only the documented abandoned uranium mines. During the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, uranium mining happened across the Four Corners region, primarily for the nuclear bombs. And so sometimes there would be mine tailings in an area, but there wasn't a mining site that was noted or documented. And so this is a widespread problem that's still being faced down in the Four Corners region. But for my research, it was place-based. We went out and we gathered water samples. We went out and before I got there, Dr. Janet Ingram and her group had talked with the communities about what their interests and what their concerns were. And so well water was one. The native grasses that the sheep ate, because down there, sheep was one of their staple foods. And so the water, the grasses, the sheep, the soil, these are all things that we took into our lab and started to analyze. And down there you can see a set, that's just one set of samples that Dr. Jenny Ingram is sitting by for soil analysis. And that was really helpful for me to consider, like, being in this new world, learning about the environmental impacts here and what the indigenous populations here are facing in Arizona. and that traditional ecological knowledge really drove the research. My part of our research lab was focused on a solution, literally a solution, an aqueous solution that was meant to, and with hopes of being able to chelate the metals, the uranium out of soils and stabilizing it so it would no longer be mobile in the environment. Through my 4 years of research, I learned that this agent, this rhamnolipid, this biosurfactant I was using, really worked great with iron and really worked great with lead and nickel and copper and every other heavy metal except uranium. So as part of science, if any of you have done research, sometimes you learn what doesn't work, and that's just as valuable as learning what does work. So that's what we learned, was that this rhamnolipid that we were testing did not really chelate uranium very well. But also when I was in Arizona, this word over here, activism, I didn't know this is what I was doing as part of this movement, Defend the Sacred, and trying to save the San Francisco peaks. And so this was an issue. Snowball, where I love to snowboard. This was part of why I moved to Flagstaff, because I said I can go snowboarding within 40 minutes. I can be at the top of the mountain with my snowboard on going down. And I just loved the mountain. It really did become something sacred to me. And as I was going to school, they had started conversations about using wastewater on the San Francisco peaks to make snow for Snowball, the resort up there. And, on so many different levels, I thought that was wrong. From a science perspective, there had been very little testing on the impacts of what that would mean for that specific ecosystem. Also, things like pharmaceuticals do not get filtered out through wastewater treatment plants, and that was a big concern of mine. But never did I think of myself as an activist. I just thought, this is something wrong that I have to stand up for. And it wasn't until years later that I realized that that's what I was doing. I was part of this activism movement. Oops. Unfortunately, they are making snow on the San Francisco peaks. And I'm not sure what the implications or effects have been, or if that's being monitored. I really haven't followed the issue, unfortunately. But it is something that I think about often, especially when I think about my time that I spent on that mountain. And I refuse to go there now, of course, because I'm not going to promote an economy like snowmaking with wastewater treatment water. So so that experience in itself really opened my eyes to environmental impacts, not just the uranium, not just the wastewater at Snowball, but in my own community. And so this picture, maybe you guys have seen, maybe you haven't, is from up in Canada where the tar sands are. And this isn't my personal community. We do have homelands up in Canada, but this is really where my story comes in. In that top left picture, you can see this large piece of equipment they were planning on transporting through our homelands, through our reservation, along the Clearwater River, which we consider sacred, where our salmon runs go through. Right past the Heart of the Monster, our creation landmark, to take this up to the tar sands. And our tribe had standoffs with the police and with Omega Morgan, the transporting, the company who has this piece of equipment. And it went, it was really, I think, quite an event for our tribe. I had been away during the discussions of this, and so I wasn't active, but I happened to be home when this was going on. And I got on the front lines and I got arrested, and I had to go to trial and face charges for trying to stand up and protect this from going past our homelands and our sacred water. And these these types of issues happen every day across Indian country and across the world to Indigenous populations where we have rights. Our treaty rights aren't just for us as Native people, but our treaty rights are also for the non-tribal populations to respect and to abide by. And I think that's really important that people think these are our treaty rights. No, the treaty is a document that serves both populations and is there for both of us to abide by. And so with this, fortunately, we did reach an agreement with the U.S. Forest Service and the Idaho federal court system. And we no longer allow these massive loads of equipment to go through our protected corridor. Although, as you can imagine, there's the ongoing battle of, oh, well, they're just going to cut things a couple more feet because the size restriction is what they had put into law. And so this piece of equipment is too big, but there's other pieces of equipment that are very close to the same size that are allowed to go through with certain permits. So it's something we're still working on. It's still an issue. It's, the battle continues. And this had happened a couple years back, but it was just resolved in 2017. Let's see. I know we're getting close to a break. Hang tight a couple more minutes and then we'll be at a good stopping point. So also through my education, my experience, like being in Arizona, that was a whole new world, but I had an opportunity to work with the Environmental Protection Agency. And I didn't learn about any Indigenous populations there through this position specifically. I was doing water quality monitoring from the helicopter. And I started to ask my supervisors, like, do you guys have a tribal liaison? Anything like that? Who are the tribal people within this region? And they connected me with Janice Whitney, who's the tribal liaison for that region. And she invited me to come over to New York City and to kind of give an intro in my background at the time. And this was like almost 8 years ago, to talk about my experience and my perspective, which looking back, I'm like, oh my gosh, what did I say? Because I felt like I was so young and I know so much more now. But it was really eye-opening for me to be in a room full of people who had never seen or met or talked to a Native American or considered what that meant in their role in working for the EPA. And so that was really eye-opening for me and just kind of adds to my experience of it doesn't matter where I am, there's always some Indigenous component that I'm thinking about. And if you ask, people will point you in the right direction to get you the answers. And if people don't have an answer, that in itself is eye-opening for people to say, wow, I've never considered that. That's something I should consider. So along my journey, I've met people who are all involved in various aspects of the environment. Up here is my best friend, Christina. She studied lamprey for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. Down here are some folks and now who work at tribal colleges doing and promoting environmental research. Over here, we have some great leaders in Indian country protecting the environment. And up here, my sister Shai, she's published a book on Laguna Pueblo medicinal plants. And so I've just met so many great people who are doing great things. And the more people I meet, the more I learn and the more support I have and the more people I can teach. And so this group up here, the Shift group, I have learned so much from them and also have been able to share my experience from an Indigenous perspective, which is, not something everybody knows. Like some of my friends up here are from the city and they have never maybe thought about that. And so it was really great to be able to share my story with them and then also learn about their perspectives because we are a diverse group. And so I'm continually making these connections and continually making observations and identifying my own strengths and what drives me. So like family, respect, reciprocity, sharing, diversity, all these things are, I didn't know that I had this knowledge until I started to talk to more people and learn. And then I was able to realize how much I actually knew. And making those observations is so key. Sometimes you see beauty in the smallest things, and sometimes it's the most magnificent things that you see. But always keeping your eyes open to the environment, because that's our greatest teachers. And these are some great women in my life who have been instrumental in my development, my, what I would say, activism, although I have a hard time with that because I'm just doing what I think is right and fighting for the good reasons. And, you know, when I look at these pictures, I think all of that knowledge there. And it's really important for each of us to recognize that. You know, these are elders. These are people who might not be here for very long or forever. And we are the ones who are we are going to be these people in the next 40 years, 50 years. And so we really need to like be conscious of that and our efforts to gain knowledge and understanding of the world around us, our relationships with others. I love these women, and they like really, their spirit carries on in me, and I hope I can represent that well in the work I do. And the work that I do, what do? I teach adults and I teach kids. This is my niece up here, Lily. You know, I do the things that I do to protect and heal the land for the people. And like I said, we come from the land, so what we do good for the land is good for us. Inspiring my family, hopefully bringing forward stronger generations, and continuing to learn on my own path, always continuing to learn. Learn at conferences from other folks. The California Indian Conference I went to last year. All that great food, you know, from the land. This is all from the land. Still know how to make it and the nutritional value. And then lastly, practicing my culture. You know, learning academically, learning from elders, but practicing my own culture is key to continuing to learn. And even my dog gets to get in on it once in a while. That's Luna with a moose bone. My Uncle Pete, who is picking mountain tea. And there's myself with some cow's, which is one of our traditional medicines. And gathering medicines of all kinds and learning what those are. And so we'll take a break right here. Gabe, how long is the break?
10 minutes.
10 minutes, okay. So I will see everybody back in 10 minutes. Let me see what I had on this. Oh, right. So for those who are on the call, you can take a break. Also, the class has received a paper that I wrote with Shapna, who's also on the call, a professor at Portland State University, and it's about decolonizing mathematics. And if Leah, you can share the link there, that would be great. For those of you who are just tuning in and haven't read the paper yet, maybe during this break, if you want to read the first 4 pages, that might help give you some framework for the rest of the conversation. So thank you guys. I'm going to take a break too, and I will be back.
You teach capstone?
Yeah. Similar to this class in some ways, but I teach the people to teach, building projects, grants, all based out of natural area.
I love my capstone. It changed everything.
One class is for a lot more time to do things. 9 a.m. And we have field trips. We have elementary school people over the region.
So you meet there. Capstone is like Here's like
been 2 years. Finally graduating.
Nice.
Yeah. How are you, Marta?
I'm okay. I'm fine. I see too. Yeah. I'm like the first day of my period.
I'm sorry.
And I'm just, yeah, the tired.
Maybe our culture is too private and sheltered about those things. Like, it's just part of it.
I'm open about it.
But not everybody's
Something
not.
about like being on call.
Yeah, totally. I get it. I'm not judging you. Yeah. And you don't know who's hearing you. Yeah. I would have done the same as you.
For a while, I was feeling really stressed out.
And if anybody online has questions, you can type them in the chat box and I can respond now. In the classroom, if you guys have questions, you can also either write them down or go up to the computer and type them, or you can just shout them out.
Everybody's gone out.
Oh, okay, that's good. Honestly, you'll save my voice a little bit.
I'm so excited to make blankets. I started it last week. But it's even 1 week. That's a baby blanket. Yeah. A friend of mine just had a baby. So I'm making her a mermaid tail.
My great grandma.
How do they make it?
I don't know, I just remember it's like a double sided. There's like a knot maybe. Like there's the two sides together.
Is it a fleece blanket? Oh, okay. I don't think this was really hard. Because you just cut strips on the ends and tie them together. If I'm thinking of the same thing.
I don't know, I just remember it was really
Well, yeah, you were 9. But square knots are hard until you're old enough for your brain to be able to. They have to be square knots because otherwise. Maybe I should just finish this row and then tail it. Trying to decide how big do you make a blanket for a newborn? That's probably big enough. Yeah, probably that. But it's like it's like What was the other one?
Small.
it for this time of year. Finally, it's right here.
Let's see. I'm going to turn, oh wait. First I need to share my screen. And then start my PowerPoint. Okay, wait, where did you guys go? Okay, you're still here. All right, so just a reminder for those in the classroom, have you guys been like writing down on that list? Yeah, okay. And those who are calling in, I hope you're doing the same. I should have pulled that back up, but sorry, I'm not going to. So here's where I left off on the continuing learning. Remember I had said talking about gathering medicines. I'm still learning to do this. I don't know it all. My Uncle Pete, who's here gathering the tea, he's really been helping me learn and taking me out and showing me the places that he used to go with my grandpa Idaho. So passing on that tradition is really, really important, and learning it is also really important. And I don't know, I'm still learning a lot. I still have so much to learn. I'm by no means an expert. Like this picture here, I went out root digging with my grandma, Geneva, and she said this is the first time anybody in my family, like from my grandparents on down, have been to this location in a long time, like probably over 20 years. And she has continually gone throughout her lifetime to this location. And this is Coquette. This is the one that I said we'll be keeping an eye out for. And this is what I went and checked today, which I'll show towards the end of the presentation. But the main thing is I'm continually learning. And here's a video that I took last year when I was digging, since it was my first time. And I didn't know how this was going to turn out. I think it was on my phone or on the GoPro. But I'm using a traditional digging stick, a tukis. Over there in Portland area, they call it a cuppin, which like even that language differentiation I struggled with when I went there. I'm like, what are they talking about? Cuppin, what is a cuppin? And finally I learned it was the digging stick. And I said, oh, a tukis, okay. So you can see I dug it up, grabbed the bulb, planted the seeds back in the ground, patted it down, and you can barely see any disturbance on the land. And so that traditional way of digging is, it's not disturbing the land, it's planting the seeds back. There's so much to it in understanding land management that can be really discussed and analyzed and studied. But that's, we don't have enough time for that. That's like another talk for another day. But I think that's really something to think about, is the tools that were traditionally used and their impact on the land. So this just shows this moose stew that I made last year. It has coquette, waweem, which is the celery looking plant you see there, and onions, which I can't remember the nimi putimpt for. Again, I'm still learning. I have a lot to learn. But this feast was like really delicious. Mostly, I mean, it was all collected and gathered by my own two hands. And it was a really good meal to have. And I just can't imagine like eating that all the time. It would be such a feast. And I've always had like this weird relationship with food, like processed food. So eating this, I just felt whole. Not just physically, but mentally and spiritually. And again, that's like my strong connection to the land. And so I'm continuing to learn. Like I've never cooked salmon like that before, but in Portland at the salmon celebration, it was something I learned at Westmoreland Park with the Brunos. And over here, where you can see I have a tukis. It's actually Judy's tukis, Judy Blue Horse Skelton. And I was using it to plant camas right there on Portland State property. Over on the left hand in the top corner, when the barges were coming through carrying, I believe it was oil, parts for the oil rigs of Shell, the oil company. We were out there protesting, and again, that term activist is always like weird to me. I had actually just gone to show up and see what was going on. And then they were doing a tutorial on kayaks, which I was like, oh, that'll be fun. I know kayaks. I just honestly wanted to get out on the water. And then as we were out there during our training, the barges were coming through and the boat was moving. And it became this direct action that I was in the middle of that I didn't have any, I didn't really plan on. Like somebody was watching my dog on the shore for me. And so I couldn't get arrested this time because I had my kid there with me. And I had to be mindful of that. Although I did feel like, you know, had the circumstances been different, I may have responded differently. And then on the far right, you can see I'm out hunting. And this was last year before I had to leave town again. And it was getting dark, so I didn't get anything that year, although I did see some deer. It's really just practicing my traditions and learning. Like those are just really key for where I'm at right now in my life. But I have to put this up here because it's so relevant to me. That one white kid that grew up on the res. And like I said, I didn't know I had all this knowledge growing up. I didn't know. It wasn't until I was in like middle school that I knew I was different. I went to school off the reservation. I am in my middle school and amongst my peers, my classmates, I was known as the Indian girl. But when I got to the res, since I didn't go to school on the res, I was known as that white girl. Even though everybody knew I was Native, there was still that conflict of identity. And that was something that, you know, I've continually, I don't want to say I've ever struggled with it, but I'm continually acknowledging that this is who I am and this is where I come from. And I do have two different perspectives. And I do, I don't want to say like walk in both worlds, but because it's all one, it's like we're all connected, but I'm able to identify these different aspects of my upbringing and of colonial perspectives that I've really inherently adapted. And sometimes I say things and I'm like, that's not what I meant, or that's not how I want it to be said. And so I'm recognizing that in myself. I just wanted to share like one example, a local example right there in Portland of how all of these different strands of my life have come together. And this is by no means my project. This is a community project. And I've been fortunate to share the story of it and be part of this process with my background in chemistry, with my background in traditional foods. And really, I feel like this, like weaving these strands together is really part of my purpose here. So we talked about the traditional ecological knowledge. Camas, though, camas is a traditional staple food throughout the Northwest. As you can see the range here on the USDA map, which is interesting. You can always zoom in to see what counties it's in, and if you do, and you zoom into the Nez Perce Reservation, Lewis County, which is within the Nez Perce Reservation boundary lines, it says there's no camas. And that's misleading because, you know, Lewis County is actually part of the Camas Prairie, what is known as the Camas Prairie. So all of these fields used to be covered in camas, these prairies, and this ecosystem was probably just so beautiful and fragrant and lush with camas and yampa and all these other species. Now it's primarily ag fields, but I point out Lewis County specifically, although it's not pulled up on this map. You know, it's not that there's not camas there. There's nobody collecting that data in Lewis County because it's on the reservation and contributing that data to the NRCS plants database. And so that's really interesting in thinking about knowledge and information. And like, you know, this is a trusted website. Like, yes, it is very trusted. Scientists use it, educators use it, but it's lacking data. And that's something to just be aware of when thinking about ecosystems and whatever you go to do in the future, that sometimes it might have some information, but it also might not have it all. And so camas is this beautiful flower. It's purple and blue and can be violet and all these shades. And believe it or not, there's been a study on that. But it's really a bulb, and that's what we're after, is this bulb, kind of like I dug up in that video. Over here, you can see somebody digging up camas at Quamish Prairie, which is outside Portland, and I'll show that on a map. You dig it up and you clean it off with water right there at that local location. You don't want to be packing all that soil and nutrients and everything away from the site. You try and leave as much as you can there. And by washing it with water at that site, that helps, that really helps promote that keeping things where you found them and only taking what you need. You don't need the soil, so leave it. You don't need the water, so leave it. You just need the bulb. After you gather the bulbs and you clean them, you also have a fire pit that you've dug, and you put rocks in, and you heat the rocks till they're glowing red. And this is the same process we do when for the sweat house. We build a fire and heat rocks, and those are the rocks we take into the sweat house. On this occasion, you have this pit, and historically these pits were long, and there were hundreds of thousands, well, probably thousands of bulbs were put into these, and other roots. And they were put into these pits and roasted. And you added other vegetation that was fresh, so it would be moist. And then you built a fire on top. So you have the rocks. You put in a couple layers of vegetation and soil. And then you put on another layer of vegetation. Then you put on the bulbs. And then you put on more vegetation and soil. And then you build a fire. And so you have this layering system. And if that's not engineering, I don't know what is, because that is, it is down to a science, what you have to do to really cook these bulbs. And when they come out, they're, in this lower picture, they've only been cooked for a couple hours, and so they're still pretty light colored. But in the middle here, you can see the progression of fresh bulbs cooked for, I think that was 0 to 6 hours. This next one was 12 to 18 hours, and this was 24 to 48 hours. So traditionally, the bulbs will be cooked for 2 or 3 days, and there's a whole science behind that in itself. And the cooking time, the longer it is, and at the higher temperature, this is where we're at for camas. It's has inulin that needs to go through the hydrologist process. So it needs to be this hot, and it needs to be this hot, and it needs to be at a long cooking temperature for it to actually be cooked, for it to be edible and nutritious. Beforehand, it's edible, but it's not really nutritious, and it makes you really gassy, according to Lewis and Clark, who tried to just eat it raw, and that didn't work out so well. So there is a science to it. And there's so much other science that's been done around camas. Like I said, I'm trying to weave in all my understandings of the chemistry and ecosystems and tradition and culture and foods, and there's just so much to think about. And this is just one species. The phylogeography of camas. That article was talking about how did camas spread throughout the Northwest. Really interesting if you get a chance to read that. Hybridization of different camas species, Quamish and Leclenii, the nutritive value, and then the ethno-ecological investigations of blue camas. And so there is science. As a scientist, there's so much you can study about our traditional foods, and in my mind, it's not just to know what is going on, but for me, it's to better protect our relatives, better to protect these species that are important to us, and to really say, this is important to us as Indigenous people, and it needs to be studied, and it needs to be considered in resource management. It needs to be considered in how we're managing the lands. And so here's some pictures of what Metro in Portland is doing to manage lands. They collect native seeds at sites to restore other sites. And so right here is a workforce, wisdom workforce, and they're gathering these camas seeds for restoration at other sites. Up here, one of our guys was cleaning the seeds, so it was really like on the ground through the whole process, and that was something important to the wisdom workforce, was being part of the system, being part of the process from beginning to end. And so cleaning the seeds, learning how to identify the seeds, learning how to document seed collection. There's a lot that goes into the science of seed collection nowadays, when I'm not sure what happened before. I'm sure there was a system, I'm just not aware of it. And that's something I hope I can learn, but I also don't know where to find that information. This is Quamash Prairie. This is outside of Beaverton, Tigard, and I'll show you a map in a second. I just want to tell you like the story of Portland Native American community and gathering camas in public natural areas. So on a reservation, we have our own challenges and barriers to gathering our traditional foods. But as an urban community, it's a whole different story. There's different issues and barriers to think about. And so here's Portland, Beaverton, and out here is Quamash Prairie. And this map over here shows the traditional, the people who are there traditionally. So this area is the Calpullia area, and that's who would have been here. And Malala, I've heard mixed conversations about that. But this map gives you a general idea. I'm not saying that's always right. I definitely have a thing with maps and being right, but this just gives you an idea of the traditional people who are here. And thinking about Quamash Prairie, we've gone out and done blessings on the site because, those are our relatives. Like, I don't know if maybe some of those bulbs were transported from Nisper's country over there. And actually, if you read one of those papers, that's not what happened. But it's just, that was my connection to land when I was in Portland. I felt a really strong spiritual and physical and mental connection to this place. And so we went out and did morning blessings there before we gathered this camas. And thinking about gathering camas at Quamash Prairie, you also have to think, how is this land being managed? What are the impacts going to be on the camas bulbs? And so you can see here, the red just delineates the prairie. The blue on the outside is where they're reforesting it. And in the dark black is where they sprayed herbicide for meadow foxtail. So you can see it's in here. This line of trees is actually, those are oaks. And so the camas grows pretty much in those within that black border, and over here also. So when you think about going out and gathering camas at this site, it's really important to consider what are they doing on this land. And that was something when I moved to Portland that had been, there had been a gathering out at Quamash Prairie already for camas, but no testing had been done. So the Native community, we were able to say, hey, we want this tested. And Metro was really helpful and said, okay, let's test it. Glyphosate and triclopyr were two of the chemicals tested. Just glyphosate is used so broadly across America that it's disheartening, I will say. And here on the right-hand side, you can just see how much glyphosate has been used over the years. And we have just gone up exponentially in our use of glyphosate on the foods that we're consuming. And again, I have issues with food, and that's one of them. It's like, oh man, all this toxins really is poisoning our food. And so thinking about Quamash Prairie, I had the same thought, and we were able to get support from Metro to go out and do these tests. And I had also asked Metro if we could know what was happening on the land. And so they sent me kind of a record of what was being applied. And this was in 2015. We collected, I believe, November 9th in 2015. And as you can see, within the first week, they had 2 chemical applications on the land. And whether it was a spot spray or a broadcast, is neither here nor there in my mind. In my mind, that's poisoning the land. But really it is, you have to consider if you're managing a land, Metro manages thousands of acres. And so for them to not use any spray, they would lose their battle against the invasive species. So there is trade-offs. My, of course, goal is to not use any, but right now where we're at in society, it is a good tool to have in our toolbox. So you can see the applications in 2015. Nonetheless, we went out and sampled. And per Portland, it was a wet downpour day. Even with our rain gear on, we were getting soaking wet. It was a muddy mess. We still had elders and children come down. It was a whole community event. It wasn't, there was a lot of women, not a lot of men. But we were out there and it was great because we got to teach Metro about camas and about gathering camas, and that you wash it right there on site, whether that's their protocol or not. That was something that we brought to the table and said, this is important to us. And so we were able to really express that. And Kurt, who works for Metro, he, bless his heart, took 5-gallon buckets over to the stream, over to the creek, and got us water and trucked it all the way back across the prairie, because he also wanted to honor that knowledge and help us practice that traditional way. So when we got the results back, there was glyphosate in all 3 sample areas, and there was some triclopyr, which was trace. The federal tolerance level for glyphosate is 0.2 parts per million. So you can see from our results, we were below that limit. And we had tested for some other chemicals, but those were the only 2 that showed up. What's interesting to me when I started to put this presentation together for the American Chemical Society, I wanted to know, what is the limit for camas? This limit is a federal tolerance level. And I think I looked up for like potatoes, because I think that was the closest thing I could find to camas. But I realized, like, wow, there's not federal levels, tolerance levels for our traditional foods. So if you wanted to go out and get something and you don't know what is a safe limit, and given in Portland we only eat these, on occasion, to me it's more than just like, oh, there's only a little bit in there, you're safe. It's not going to be enough to be toxic to you. To me, that's like, doesn't sit well. Like, that's not good enough of an answer. That's me personally. Regardless, we've continued to gather out of Quamash Prairie and have traditional feasts out there. So me personally, that's just what I think. And, something to consider in this field of ecology and traditional knowledge is when comparing to standards, like, who is setting these standards? How are these standards set? And is it actually set for what I'm interested in and what is going to impact me? And so Metro has been just really great in this process and listening to us as a community. And they're recognizing that, the land management practices that were traditionally employed onto the land were valuable and were respectful ways of managing the land. And so they've started to talk about different approaches we can take to manage the land just at Quamash. And that's the start of the conversation. Hopefully we can burn out there. We've been talking about it, and then the time passes, and there's a lot that goes into, burning public lands. There's not a big promotion for that, but I think the more we can continue the dialogue about why it's important and the longstanding history and knowledge about it, the more we can bring to the table the importance and start to really encourage that type of land management practices. And yeah, this talk in itself on the Camas and Portland population could go in all sorts of directions. It could be an environmental justice talk. It could be a talk about pesticides and herbicides in traditional foods. It could be a talk with the USDA and FDA on how they set their food standards. So there's just so many. I mean, this is just one study on one species, but really the opportunities out there to study things like this and the need is immense. And it's going to take all of us who have knowledge or have interest to have a voice and to share why it's important and to start making these issues known, and also the solutions. Like, you don't want to be that person that's like, everything's wrong in the world. Like, we have to have solutions. And our traditional knowledge has solutions. And so don't like overlook that. That's a body of knowledge that we can pull from. So that was a local example. And like I said, that's not my project, it's the community's project, and I've been fortunate to share that story. I'll also be presenting it in Olympia next month at the Northwest Scientific Association conference meeting, summit, whatever it is. I believe it's a meeting. So I'll be up there presenting that, and I get to share the story so other land managers in Seattle can think about those types of issues. Tribal folks within reservation communities or tribal communities can think about, oh, I never thought how pesticide spraying on the prairies around Lapwai are going to impact the tule gathering along the creek. You know, so I just hope that that can start to spark interest in others to think about things on a broader scale. I'm only one person and I only have like so much brain space to think of things, but I think everybody should take time to really like consider and ask questions and make observations, and look at government agencies and see what they're up to. And this brings me to the USGS. I'm not sure how many of you guys know what the USGS actually does. I will say honestly, I didn't know until maybe a year ago, and they're really the research institution of the government. Yes, the U.S. Forest Service does research, and Fish and Wildlife does research, and USDA does research, but the USGS's job is to do research, and the United States Geological Survey, and science for changing the world, for a changing world. My project right now is sponsored by the National Science Foundation, which I'm a graduate fellow through. And I heard I could get an internship. And so I started exploring all the agencies I could get an internship with. USGS was one of them. And I came across this project in Glacier National Park, which instantly I'm like, I love national parks. Tell me more. Glacier, and I saw grizzly bears and climate change and huckleberries. Like, these are all just hitting me right. And I thought, wow, I really wanted to learn about this. And the way this project came about, pre my involvement, was really a lot of grizzly bear research had been done. And they realized that 15% of grizzly bear diets is huckleberries. And they also wanted to know how climate change might be impacting grizzly bears, but that's really hard to study. And so they figured if we can understand how huckleberries are being impacted, maybe we can predict what might happen with bears. And so that's kind of where this project was at when I saw it. And they had developed a mobile app for monitoring huckleberries and using citizen science. So park visitors can come into the park, download an app, monitor the phenology. So the phenology is the seasonal changes of plants and animals, like birds migrate, but phenology, birds. So here, phenology of like the osprey would be, when the osprey comes, we know summer is going to start. So phenology is like that timing of everything. And over at Glacier, they had this mobile app developed. And although they had hopes of unrolling it last summer, there was a lot of glitches and just a lot of technology things that needed to be worked out in the app before they released it. So we're hoping for the summer version 2 to be released. But when I heard about this, I just instantly thought like seasonal rounds, how I was saying at the beginning, like I go out and make these observations because I'm gathering these plants. So I need to know what's going on. And this is like phenology is a study of seasonal changes. Well, if you're following a seasonal round and you're living off the land, like you are doing phenology every day and making observations. Lo and behold, they haven't been documented, written or on a graph or on a data sheet, but we have the oral stories. And my grandmas can say, oh yeah, that one year in whatever, when so-and-so was born, we didn't go out to pick huckleberries until really late in the season. And so that gives me like a date and a place, and I can look up the climate of that year and see what was really going on and how climate might be impacting the huckleberries. So over at Glacier, they've developed this app, and my project right now is really seeing how tribes might be might be gathering phenology data, how Indigenous populations, especially through citizen science. So all the grandmas and aunties who go out and berry pick, are they at all documenting that knowledge for their own tribes or for their own family to use and say, wow, we're starting to see these patterns. Oral tradition is great, but this is our knowledge. And like I said previously, we can use our knowledge to our advantage and say, here is what we're seeing. Here's why it's important. And here's what needs to be done. Maybe we need to burn this patch of the forest so the huckleberries can grow better. Maybe if we burn, they won't be as impacted by climate change. There's a lot of questions. Again, there's so many questions that are not yet researched. But if we start thinking about this science side of things and our traditional knowledge, which also is science, and bringing them together, we can really start to understand the ecosystems much more in depth than we do from just science, Western science data, or just oral tradition. Bringing them together, we really can better understand our ecosystem. Let me check on the time here. Okay, so with my project right now, another part of it, since my master's is in science teaching, is developing curriculum. And I thought, this is still evolving. It's not like up and published yet, but it's something we're working on. And the first part of the curriculum is, if there's so many people out there teaching phenology that I've met who have not thought about the seasonal rounds or the traditional uses of whatever they're studying, or the people who are already watching these things year after year after generation after generation. It's just a huge miss. I think we're just missing this huge bank of data that we can be using as Indigenous people to protect and heal the land that we are part of, that we come from. So the first part of the curriculum, and this is just a lesson plan within the curriculum, but it always starts with the traditional knowledge and really understanding that and teaching kids and teaching adults. The second part talks about the phenology and really gets into the science. And this curriculum is developed for middle school students, middle school and high school students, but I do think it can be kind of enhanced to serve all populations, all communities, even in higher ed. And so down here, you can see this as a picture kids really get a kick out of. It's first on this side picture, you can see that's actually a camera. And so it's a camera that is timed to take pictures at a certain frame and really monitor the growth of one single huckleberry, one single flower that comes out and blooms and then turns into a huckleberry. And so it's capturing that phenology data or that seasonal change of that specific shrub. With the cameras out there though, and with it being Glacier National Park, you better believe there's going to be grizzly bears there. And so capturing those grizzly bears is really interesting. And they have all sorts of studies going on with grizzly bears and huckleberries and pollinators, not just at Glacier National Park, but also at Salish Kootenai College. So, and I did just see there was like a post for internships. Maybe I can forward that to you, Gabe, if anybody in your class is interested.
Yeah, please do.
So thinking about the phenology, and so I know I've kind of maybe blew over that word fast, but phenology, and I've had people say like phrenology, which is not phenology, it's something else, but phenology, the way the mobile app is set up is research scientists set up sites. So they went out and tagged very specific shrubs. And on the mobile app, you get to the park and it says, okay, download the Science Cache app, and you download it. And it says, okay, I'm going to hike Huckleberry Mountain Trail. And you select Huckleberry Mountain Trail. Once you start walking, it's like geocaching. If any of you have done that, it's like a treasure hunt. So it follows you with hints and a map to the location. When you get there, it says you've arrived, and then it gives you hints on how to find that exact shrub. Because I don't know if anybody has like tried to find a huckleberry shrub in a forest, but it's really hard unless you have explicit directions on how to get there. And so there's landmarks. They say, okay, look to your right, and if you see the bent tree, the huckleberry shrub is at the base of the tree on the north side, or whatever. So that's an example. And so they have these tagged huckleberry shrubs out there. You go, and the mobile app walks you through like every stage of phenology that it wants to gather the information on. Is there a developing berry? Is there a flower bud? Is it open? Well, there's a flower bud. There's a flower bud open. There's the ripening berries, and then there's the ripe berries. And so the mobile app walks you through each of those phases, and you document how many of those you see on the shrub. And then comparing that to the climate data. So you have the snow depth, the daily temperature, and the precipitation. And so when you look at those, you kind of get, now we're getting like real sciencey, you get all this data. The sites are at different elevations, which is interesting. They're on different slopes. They have different percent coverage with the densiometer. And this is the first day, the first ripe berry. So on the 204th day of 2014, the first ripe berry at Bering Creek was observed. And so this is data. I mean, this is like straight from the climate, straight from the observations, straight from the mobile app. I think some of them in 2016, the researchers used on site to gather that. But as you can imagine, being a scientist and getting out to every site in Glacier National Park once a week, like that's a lot of hiking, and there's no way you can do it. So enlisting citizens and people who are already out there on the land is really a great way for us as scientists to access more information. Down here, I kind of just made some, what's the word I'm looking for? Like conclusions of what the weather was telling us. The snow depth, was it late or early? In 2014, it was late. In 2015, it was early. In 2016, it was early. And so when you go through and you look at these climate patterns, and then you start to look at the first ripe berry, you can come up with some conclusions. So here's the day of the first ripe berry on the y-axis. On the x-axis, you have the elevation. And so in 2014, the blue line, you can see, what did we say it was? In 2014, the spring was late and it was cool and wet. Well, in 2014, the first ripe berry was almost 190 days in. But in 2015, when spring was early and it was warm out and it was dry, the berries ripened earlier in the season. And so over here you can see all these conclusions that we kind of distilled from that. Elevation, I'm thinking about elevation. As elevation increases, the day of the first ripe berry occurs later in the year, which a lot of us would expect, right? Down in lower elevations, things ripen earlier. As you go up, they ripen later. That was pretty straightforward, but when you think about middle and high school kids, that might be profound, and there's a million questions you can think about and ask from that. On climate, when comparing climate, huckleberry phenological changes are observed earlier when the climate is warm and dry, with an early spring, and later when climate is cool, wet, and with a late spring. So that's kind of what I already described. And then thinking about elevation and climate. So now we're talking about two factors to consider. The changes in climate, I'll move this up. The changes in climate impact huckleberry phenology greater. There's a greater difference here at lower elevations than it does at higher elevations. And so again, there's a lot of questions that we can pull from that, but really just gathering this baseline data of when things are ripening. I mean, that's a first step. There's so much knowledge that isn't documented like that. And there's mobile apps and things that we as citizens or traditional gatherers or scientists or educators can be part of gathering that data. And so Science Cache is the app that we use for Glacier National Park. It's very site specific, species specific. The developers set up the hints and input the pictures. It's all very much has to be developed. And so that's what this shows here on this left-hand side. The question details, count all the flowers on the stem, and so scientists and developers put that in. This middle one is Nature's Notebook, which is something all of us can access on your phone or online. And this one really, you can set up like a site. I'm working with Gabe to maybe set one up at Tryon Creek, where it's a set site and people can come and be part of that project. And so you put in these observations, you choose the plant, and you say, does it have young leaves? Does it have leaves? Does it have flowers? And again, it walks you through all of that. And it has information on helping you decipher what stage it's in. There's other methods to monitoring phenologies. There's remote cameras, there's paper data sheets, which is shown down here. And those can be found through Nature's Notebook and also the U.S. National Phenology Network, I believe. So if you just want to do paper data sheets, that's one thing. And I'm trying to talk with tribes and see what they're doing and if what they've considered their options for. Not just like field techs who are out there, but also folks who are in the community, educators, gatherers, and anybody really who's on the land. But this is one that I wanted to show you from today. iNaturalist is another mobile app. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar, but iNaturalist is an app where basically you can take a picture of a plant, an animal, amphibian, insect, and upload it. Even if you don't know what it is, you can upload it. And people will help you identify what it is. And again, this helps monitor the phenology. It's geo-tagged, so it's the location. Once this pulls up, I'll kind of explain that part a little bit more. My goal this year, which is tough because I don't get out as much as I would like, is to capture as much phenology data as I can just in my personal adventures. I'm going to see if this will reload. I wonder... Oh, there it is. Okay. So this is what, this is coquite. This is that potato-y type of root that the video showed me digging up. I made the stew with. And so today I went up to see where it was at. March 6th at 1:45, it was up there. And this is what it looks like right now. Canby's lomatium. Somebody named it that, not coquite. And you can see my flash drive there, and so I always try and have something to show for size of what I'm observing. There's the new growth, and so like I said, I wanted to try and capture all the phenophases, so the new growth of it by itself. Then this one would be stage 2 with it. Well, there was another one with it starting to bud, and then the flowering. And in that picture, or in the video that I showed, that was actually it was ready to go to seed. And so it made sense. That's when we dig it so we can replant the seeds. This is just a close-up through my loop of what the flowers look like. And showing kids these type of pictures, they really like take off with their imagination. Like, oh, I wonder what lives in there. And I wonder, I mean, just anything. Kids are great. I sometimes wish we had their brain because they have such phenomenal questions and observations. So this is iNaturalist. This is something I'm using right now because it doesn't have to be in a specific site. Doesn't have to be a specific species. It's really just kind of a whole random selection of whatever you're observing. And another cool thing about it is you can set your location. And so I put this obscured, which has a 10-mile radius because I don't want everybody to know where I go and get my kikit. That's kind of like a sacred family location. But it's somewhere around here that I went today to get our to check on our kikit and see where it was at. And I called my grandma and told her I went up there and told her it should be maybe another 2 or 3 weeks before it's ready to be collected. Let's see, how do I get back? This one. So that's iNaturalist. That's another mobile app. I think it's really cool and beneficial. Oh, I'll show you one more thing. One more thing on here. Oops. Okay, so under, say I just want to know about camas, since that was another species we were talking about. Oops. Camas. Quamash specifically. I'm not particularly interested in the Atlantic camas since I've never seen it or engaged with it. But this shows you all the camas observations that have been made. Somebody has the new growth. Leah, I know we were checking it out at your house. Maybe these are some good pictures that we could look at to identify it. It's really hard to tell what's growing until it comes up in flowers. And that's something I'm working with some college students over at Salish Kootenai College, hopefully this summer, is gathering more of this data and really making like a guidebook for phenology of traditional and culturally significant plants. So there's what the new growth looks like. And it's just really cool because you can go on here and see all the observations of a specific species.
Ciarra, we cannot see what you're looking at right now, so you might need to share your browser.
Oh, you guys should have told me sooner. Oh, to do what?
Saw your PowerPoint.
I think if you share your browser, we'll be able to see, because you were just looking at a website, right, with iNaturalist?
Yeah.
If you share your browser, we should be able to see what you're looking at.
Okay, let me see. Share screen. Share desktop.
That would work too.
Okay, now you can see everything?
Yep.
Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, you guys. You guys are probably like, what is she talking about? So, iNaturalist. Now you guys can see what I'm talking about. It shows the whole map of where these observations were made for camas. This is Camassiat quamish, small camas, common camas. And, you know, you can go in and click and see. And, oops. And so May 31st, 1995, this observation was made. So I know in May 31st, 1995, camas was flowering at, where was this? Out towards Deary. And so, I mean, somebody could, I don't have time to do it, but just start putting all of this type of information and understanding what is the climate impacts on camas phenology and what might those impacts or implications be for pollinators or traditional gatherers. You know, maybe our root feasts and the timing and the order are going to change because of climate changing. There's just a lot of questions out there thinking about culture and ecology together. Okay, so, whoops. Yeah, that's all weird. I'll just go back through here. So you guys can see the PowerPoint now, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So plant phenology, mobile apps that you yourself can use, or you can help get a site set up. I'm also helping Wisdom of the Elders set up a site at their office location because they have a little bit of a natural area behind there with some culturally significant species. And so really it comes to this like this overlap of the traditional knowledge and this Western science. And like I said, I'm trying to weave these strands together, and all I mean, not just those two, but all the strands of my life together in continuing the work of protecting and healing the land for the people, and with that in mind that we are the land. And on this side, you can see the characteristics of traditional ecological knowledge. And on this side, you can see the Western science. And in the middle is this common ground. And for my thesis research, this is really what I studied, was this common ground and middle school students' understanding of what science is. And so for me, when I started learning, I mean, I've known about this diagram for a long time. And I always thought, that is science. Like, in my mind, that's just science, but it's also traditional ecological knowledge. Well, in the education world, they have the next generation science standards. And this is part of the standards in helping middle school students, particularly in this slide, understand that science is a way of knowing, and that science knowledge assumes order and consistency in natural systems. Science is a human endeavor. So these three things, like, educators are trying to work really hard to make sure that students understand those. And my argument, or my suggestion, was that if we can teach traditional ecological knowledge, we are teaching these. So if I have a traditional fisher come in, that is exhibiting that men and women from different social, cultural, and ethnic backgrounds work as scientists and engineers. Maybe they're not collecting data, but they sure are out there observing, and they are collecting data, these observations. How many fish did they catch? Where did they catch those fish? What was the weather like? All of that is science. All of that is science information, as much as it is traditional knowledge. And so really finding the comparison between those two was empowering for me, because, like I said, I'm still learning. I'm still learning the knowledge that I have, that I didn't know was, like, valuable. This was just the way I was raised. I didn't know, people in Idaho don't know that salmon run that far inland. Towards it, it's almost in McCall, Idaho. Most people don't know salmon run that far inland, and not just they're not fisheries, they're not hatchery salmon, they're wild salmon. So that brings me, I know we have a couple more minutes to this last point, and I hope those who called on to the webinar were able to read over a couple of the pages of this paper. And the class, I believe, had read it before I was scheduled to come last time. And in writing this paper with Shapna, and very much gratitude goes to her for helping me really develop my ideas around this. But in thinking about decolonizing mathematics, and when Gabe had invited me to speak at this class, I instantly thought, like, comparing decolonizing mathematics and the parallels between decolonizing ecology. And so I scanned through the first 4 pages also and came up with these kind of problems of mathematics as is, not decolonized. And I really saw that power was an important facet of mathematics. It was very Eurocentric. There were racial and sexual inferiority complexes throughout, not just mathematics, but STEM. It was highly academic. There was a hierarchy of systems of who had what knowledge and what that meant. If you took calculus 2, you were above people who only took geometry. And there was a political status that came with that, and it was very dehumanized. It was all about the numbers, the equations, but not so much about what those meant, the applications, or even thinking about other ways of counting. So like 1, 2, 3, Nox Lapit Mitat. And what does Nox Lapit Mitat actually mean? What did those words come from? It means something different in Nimi Putimpt, Nez Perce language, than 1, 2, 3, which are just numbers. So there's a lot to unpack there. I hope some found that paper interesting. What I also found was most valuable was pointing out the benefits of decolonizing mathematics, or opening up the field to those of us who are considered other knowledge carriers to have a seat at the table, to be able to express our understanding and perspectives of the world. And so the benefits of including diversity, having an inclusive discussion with all knowledge holders, it's non-hierarchical, there's mutual respect, we gain a better understanding of systems as a whole, and humanity is relevant. And that's like, should be the key of studying anything, is we as humans are part of the system, not apart from it, and keeping that humanity and that human factor is just very, very important, and so many times it's dismissed. And lastly, the knowledge is related to political, social, cultural, and academic facets of our lives. It's not just academic. Mathematics is not just academic. Ecology is not just academic. Very much is it political and cultural and social. And so decolonizing these bodies of knowledge, or what people are perceiving as mathematics or perceiving as ecology or science, breaking down those barriers and inviting all the voices in gives us all these benefits. And so with the last few minutes, I want you to think again about what your connection to nature is. If you're kind of filling out that form, you have a bunch of examples of TEK that I've talked about, but really just what is your connection to nature? Now this is where you can write your whole story. For those in class, if you want to get out like a fresh sheet of paper, I'm going to ask Gabe if you can collect those and either scan or take a picture of them. I'm just really interested in responses. Leah has a link that she can put in the chat box for those who are online. I'd be really interested in to see anyone's responses, and it can be a short response or a long response. Either way, I'm just really curious, and the whole take-home message from this presentation is, this is only my story. This by no means answers every question under the sun. If anything, I hope it made you think of more questions. And just to point out, like, there's others doing this work. Like Gabe has his own story. Everybody has their own story. Leah has her own story. Shapna has her own story. Stacia, my sister, who I think is on here, has her own story. Christina has her own story. Hannah has her own story. We all have our own story and our own banks of knowledge to pull from. And really, I hope this helped you realize, like, your knowledge is valuable, 1. 2, you have to identify that knowledge, because I'm still learning things that I didn't know that I knew, I guess. I don't know how to, like, say that, but I'm still learning things that I didn't know that I knew. I don't know how else to say it. I'm still identifying knowledge that I have. And I think it's valuable to do that self-reflection. And then 3, sharing that knowledge. And 4, always continuing to learn. So never think you know everything. My grandpa used to say, the day you don't learn anything, it's the day that you wasted a day of your life, or something along those lines. So I hope that was helpful. Gabe, I don't know if you want to open it up for questions, and we can have people type into the chat box if you have a question. But also you can take time to write that reflection piece now. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Ciarra. We've been doing reading response or speaker responses this term, so that'll be part of our assignment. I'll scan those and email those over to you.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you for your time and your good words and taking your time to make this happen. Hope we all appreciate it. Thank you, Leah, for helping out on the technical side, and everybody else for joining us. I guess we'll start first with questions, class. Comments, further explanation. I was also, you mentioned a little bit, Ciarra, about your master's project that I was fortunate enough to sit in on as part of a committee. I was going to follow up with you a little bit. Are you going to be presenting that work anywhere or continuing?
I just presented it this past weekend at the Idaho Environmental Education Summit conference meeting. And And I am continuing to build upon what I found. So for my research, I worked with Cryptic Salmon Camp and then also a Nez Perce Tribe Math and Science Camp, and looked at how incorporating TEK into science curriculum impacted middle school students' understanding of the nature of science, so those standards. And what I found was that when you incorporate TEK, when you incorporate TEK, students do improve their understanding of what science is and who does science and how is science done. And a lot of that is just through the way TEK is taught, talking, oral tradition, learning from elders and community members. And then also that knowledge in itself, the way it's taught and the knowledge itself, kids are able to relate to better than if it's just an abstract concept about computers that they're learning. Like software and hardware of computers doesn't really help improve their understanding of what science is. So that's what I found with my research last summer. This summer, I'm really fortunate. I'm going to be working with CritFic to plan and design and coordinate their salmon camp, which will be in Yakima this summer. So I'm hoping to really engage and promote and encourage the incorporation of TEK in ways that I saw was valuable, and bring in the community members in the ways that I saw was valuable. And then also working at Heritage University and the Yakima Nation through a National Institutes of Health grant, and developing curriculum for high schoolers on chemistry and culture. And so really talking about where those two don't have to be in conflict, they can be in harmony and be used to promote protection and healing of our lands. So those are kind of the two projects that I'm going to be working on this summer that my research has been really the foundation of. Yeah.
You spoke about the uranium mines that were left on the reservations. What exactly were the environmental and social impacts of those?
Yeah, that's, I mean, that could be a whole course. But really,
what was like the brief, like affecting the water supplies directly or anything of that nature?
So the mine tailings, which is basically the leftover of what was processed, those piles of mine tailings, to remediate them, they put 18 inches of topsoil on. And if you've ever been down in the Southwest, it's always windy. And so that topsoil has been long gone. So those uranium and radioactivity is being carried across the landscape in the air. It's also getting into the groundwater, which feeds into the wells. And a lot of the population doesn't have access to running water, and so they get their water from the wells. And a lot of those were contaminated. And sometimes EPA would have signs up that said contaminated water, warning, do not drink. But it wasn't in Navajo, it wasn't in Diné. And so they didn't understand exactly what that meant and what the health implications were for drinking that. And on the flip side, EPA didn't understand that that is the only water source for some people, and that putting up a sign and not drinking that water isn't an option. They're going to drink that water. And so, the in the air and the water were the two main things. But people had built their houses out of clay that was, had not been remediated properly, and so their houses were radioactive. And there's a lot to it. A lot of the miners were Diné people, and a lot of health problems came from that. Even though the mining companies were aware of the dangers, they didn't provide the proper protective gear for the miners. And so there's been lawsuits still going on, but it's, a lawsuit's one thing, but like actual acknowledgement of the problem and the atrocities of people's behavior and inhumane actions were important. Anything else?
Other questions?
Yeah.
I just want to say thank you, Sarah, for willingness to share today, and this has been really valuable to me, and I think to the rest of us. But tomorrow I'm presenting in my contemporary issues in a new country class on decolonizing education. I was wondering if I could share some of my notes on what you shared with us so far in class as an example of some of the work being done.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Have you experienced any kinds of barriers in terms of the traditional knowledge that you're sharing? Because there's certain tribes have knowledge that they want to protect.
Yeah, that's usually the first question I get asked when, especially talking about the phenology data. The sacred locations. What are you going to do with this data? And really, so my tribe and the way I was raised is that you want to share your knowledge. You want others to understand you. And so for me, I've always been really open with sharing that. And I invite people to come to our annual fishing trip with us so they can see and experience it, because I can sit here and tell you about it, but until you get your feet in that freezing cold water, like you don't know what it's all about. And for me, sharing the knowledge and the experience is valuable. Keeping it secret is, it is part of the historical trauma. It is part of what has happened in the past and why people have that kind of perspective of keeping knowledge secret, and I get it, and the cultural appropriation of knowledge. I get it. I get all of that. And I do get asked that a lot. And for me, this is just how I was raised and my experience and my story and my approach. But when working with other Indigenous people or non-Indigenous people, really just respecting the ways that they are comfortable with. And like I said, sharing my personal narrative sometimes does open people up. They're like, oh, okay, that does make sense. Like if people don't know what's valuable to us, how are they going to even think about considering that in their policies, right? So that's my perspective on it. But I do get asked that a lot, and I know there's experts who can who've written their dissertations on traditional ecological knowledge and cultural appropriation. That's not my focus. This is just like my passion and my approach.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Any other questions?
Would you say for the most part that most of the institutions that you work with are very receptive to tech?
It's interesting because some really want to know all about it in every aspect and every way to bring it to the forefront of the conversation. And others are like, oh yeah, we hear you, and check a box and continue on their way. So, I feel like there's a stronger movement now maybe than when I first started my undergrad education 10 years ago. I feel like with Standing Rock, that was a big issue that was at the forefront and in people's faces. And with social media now, people were aware of it. Whereas, the Snow Bowl and the reclaimed water on the San Francisco peaks, there wasn't as strong as a movement. Like I said, these issues are happening everywhere, every day, across the globe. And I think, I don't know, I think the conversation is getting louder about the issues. Whether it's received or taken beyond that is another story. And that's issue by issue basis.
Well, thank you again. sharing.
Yeah, thank you guys. I appreciate you listening. And if, Gabe, you have my email and information. If anybody wants that, you can get it from Gabe. Anybody who's on the online, I'll type it in right here for you. And you can contact me by email if you have any questions or comments or suggestions. I really take criticism well, so if you want to tell me like, don't talk about this ever again, then tell me that. That would be great. Any feedback would be appreciated. So thank you guys. I really do appreciate your time, Gabe. It's always good working with you, and I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, Leah.
Thank you, Ciarra. We've got some gifts to gift you.
Oh yeah?
Made a couple necklaces.
I thought you guys were gonna sing me a song.
You gonna sing her a song? You better sing her a song, Gabe.
Yeah, we're gonna sing a
Go
song.
ahead, sing her a song.
Let's sing,
What are you gonna sing?
we're gonna sing a song of thanks.
Oh, good one. How about you, I said?
Katsiyaw pama tamina. Katsiyaw pama tamina. Katsiyaw pama tamina. Katsiyaw pama tamina. It's an acapella. No drum. The rattle.
Imagas Katsiaya.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you guys.
And you'll have to let us know when you're coming back to Portland.
I will. A couple weeks.
Okay.
All right. Thank you guys.
Thanks. Thank you.
Anything up there?